I'm Laura Tragi. I'm Veronica's mom, and I'm 50 years old.
I'm Lauren Evans, and I'm 18 years old, and I'm Veronica's cousin.
I'm Shirley Spreitzer, Veronica's grandmother. I'm 83.
I'm Kathy Miller, Veronica's cousin, and I'm 58.
And I'm Veronica Tragi. I'm 18, and these are my note cards. Feeling the boat slicing through the waves beneath me, and the wind in my hair, and the salty spray of the sea on the back of my neck, I wondered if this trip had actually happened. At times it felt like a dream, or like it was happening to someone else, and I was just watching it all play out. It felt like a completely different world, and I guess in some ways it was. It would be hard not to see the stark differences between sleepy little Bellevue, Nebraska, where I was 2 weeks prior, and vibrant Sorrento, Italy. 2 short weeks, and yet it felt like ages ago that I waved goodbye to my family and boarded the plane. Flying is not enjoyable for me in any way, and the very idea of it threatened to send me into a claustrophobia-driven panic attack that early June morning. I gripped the armrests until my knuckles turned white. My heart threatened to beat out of my chest, and I realized that if the plane didn't go down like I so feared it would, I would surely die of a heart attack on the way there. Fortunately, I managed to avoid both of these situations and made it to my first destination, Lucerne, Switzerland, in a haze of TSA lines, heavy luggage, and airport McDonald's. I hadn't been very interested in going to Switzerland, as we were only going to be there for 3 days and I was anxious to get to Italy. Yet within a couple hours of being there, I had decided I wanted to live there for the rest of my life. The formidable Swiss Alps stretching themselves across the horizon, coupled with the bustling city streets of Lucerne, had me head over heels for a city I didn't even know I wanted to visit. I'd always felt that breathtaking was a cheesy, even cliched word, yet climbing Mount Pilatus in Switzerland was genuinely breathtaking, both figuratively and literally. Standing up there, above the crowds, above the city, even above the clouds, I felt like all the oxygen had been sucked out of my lungs. Maybe it was just the altitude, but I think the view had something to do with it as well. The mountains provided the backdrop for my time in Switzerland, and that was part of the appeal. Waking up in the morning and watching the fog wrap itself around them, late-night swims in frigid mountain lakes, and coming back from a busy day in the city to the peaceful silence their presence can bring. The mountain serenity only magnified the controlled chaos that was my next destination, Venice, Italy. The city of canals, as beautiful as it was, looked more like the city of street vendors at times. The sun beat down on me as I went on tour after tour. I felt the hot cobblestones under my feet as I crossed the bridges of that floating city. Finally, my group found an easier way to travel the canals. Alejandro steered us deftly through Venice's labyrinth, speaking to his fellow gondoliers as we took in the sights of that stately city. I had never heard the phrase Mamma Mia used unironically before, and I haven't since. Hearing it from an actual gondolier in Italy was by far the highlight of my trip. A long sweltering day in Venice ended with a midnight swim in the Adriatic Sea. I went to sleep with sandy hair and the promise that tomorrow would be even busier. Florence was like a calmer, less waterlogged version of Venice, with the same architectural artistry and swanky storefronts instead of street vendors. A tour-provided scavenger hunt sent my group through every nook and cranny, every crowded, narrow street of the city. We delved further and further into the unknown, all for a chance of winning that coveted mystery prize, no matter how predictably disappointing it may be. I had the crucial role of crossing items off our list as we found them: the David, the Duomo, Dante's house. As we reached our final item on the list, the Basilica di Santa Croce, where Michelangelo and Galileo were buried, I realized the enormity and significance of the situation. I realized I had seen thousands of years of history in just one day, and a thought like that is kind of difficult for a brain to comprehend. When I stood looking up at Michelangelo's David in all his naked glory, or climbed through the endless maze of staircases in the home of Dante Alighieri, reality didn't hit me right away. Florence, in all its many wonders, is something that most people only get to experience through books, television, movies, and there I was, living it, experiencing it firsthand. After Florence, we went to Rome, a city that was simultaneously exactly and nothing like I imagined it to be. Our first stop was the Colosseum. I stood where emperors once sat comfortably, watching gladiators fight for their lives. I could practically feel the history seeping into me as I looked across that expansive area. I thought about the thousands upon thousands of people who passed through that monument, each with their own stories, as I looked through the tunnel-like cells where gladiators awaited their triumph or defeat. Leaving the Colosseum, dazed by the thoughts spinning through my head, I continued to our next stop and next country, the Vatican. The Vatican was a culture shock and sensory overload of epic proportions. We went to the Vatican Museum first, and everywhere I looked were magnificent pieces of art and architecture. Every square inch of the building, from floor to ceiling, was intricately decorated in such a way that one could spend an entire year just studying one wall. Any space that wasn't filled up with irritable, pushy tourists was taken up by towering marble statues of any and every subject. I had to try to wildly snap pictures of anything I could, try not to run into people, and take in the excitement of the moment as I experienced it, all while trying not to get separated from my group and lost in the Vatican forever. To say I was overwhelmed would be an understatement, but it was well worth it. I made my way through the dimly lit final portion of the museum, past the incorruptible bodies of popes, tapestries bigger than my house, and statues galore. Finally, I reached the piece de resistance of the Vatican, other than the Pope, the Sistine Chapel. The most well-known feature of the Sistine Chapel is, of course, its elaborately painted ceiling, depicting 9 scenes from the biblical book of Genesis. This was, in my mind, the most highly anticipated moment of the trip. I stepped in the room, craned my neck back, and beheld one of the most revolutionary pieces of artwork the world has to offer. Surprisingly, as I stood squished between sweaty tourists, a cacophony of foreign languages in my ears, I thought about how lucky I was. I got to witness, in person, the detail, the dedication, and the pure talent of Michelangelo's most famous creation. I saw so many amazing things in Rome, too many to even try to explain. I traveled through the luminous city at night, walked among the ruins of ancient Romans, and much more. And despite its crowded conditions, I was sad to leave it. As I glided through the turquoise waters off the coast of Sorrento, I reflected on this trip that I never thought in a million years would happen to me, but did. It wasn't perfect, not in any means of the word. I probably lost half my body weight in sweat throughout its duration, was filled with anxiety every time I boarded a plane, and the bobblehead of the Pope that I bought in Rome was decapitated in my backpack. All of it, every second of the trip, though, was worth it. And I was even able to glue Pope Francis's head back on upon my return. As the boat docked and the sun began to set on my final day in Italy, I thought about the good and the bad. I thought about all the beautiful cities, and I daydreamed about gelato. Throughout this jumble of thoughts, however, one prevailed. I never wanted to leave.